Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, Doc. So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing great. Welcome to episode 8 of Grand and Miraculous. I can't believe it. 8 episodes. That's 2 months, with a few gaps here and there. But I'm so grateful that you're here. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight talking about PeopleMover and all the memories and nostalgia that it brought to the table. I look forward to seeing lots of great comments in chat about this ride. I do want to point out, I will be a little bit abbreviated tonight. I really want folks to go over to the Hitchhiking Bones after this show. The channel, the Hitchhiking Bones, are good friends, and they're actually interviewing Tom Nab tonight, who was really the first person Walt hired to be Tom Sawyer. So I'm going to get through the content, and then I'm going to put the link at the end, and hopefully we can all raid their channel and give them a lot of support, because that's a pretty big get. But anyway, in case you don't know who I am, and your first time here, my name's John. I go by the username Spaceship Ears. I want to welcome everybody to the channel as we talk about a very, very beloved attraction tonight. And I want to welcome the people watching the replay as well. Let me throw up our mission statement in case you're not familiar. Our mission statement is to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions, exploring their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back, with your voice shaping the journey. So I want to cover, before I get to chat, I want to show you what actually happened on our website. So in case you don't know, we have a website called grandmiraculous.com with no and. And if I can get this added. We covered Space Mountain last time, and whoa, boy, look at the scores. The overall analysis for Space Mountain ended up at about 8.19, according to our calculations. Now, that's almost as much as our top score getter so far, which was a Great Movie Ride. So it's just a notch behind the Great Movie Ride. But I'm really liking what I'm seeing here with the votes. I would encourage you to go to the website. If you're not familiar, Nightbot will add links in the chat, and you can add your own voice and contribute to this community analysis. Poor Superstar Limo, ended up at 2.25. So You know, if Superstar Limo had turned out to be a 10 and Space Mountain had been a 2, then I might be worried. But so far, everything seems to be lining up. All right, so I want to get to chat. Let me welcome in some early comers who are here very early. Thank you so much for the support. Lamont Gray, my friend, hope you're doing well. Mike Beachman, Miss K, my stepmom. Hello, Miss K. Hope you're doing great. Mike Beachman is here. Theme Park Giant is here. Matt is here. Miss Debbie Bernfeld, you're so supportive in so many channels. Thank you so much for being here. Fire Dragon 57. Let's see. I saw Sylvia here. Thank you for being here. Glad to have you. Jan is here. And I think that's it for now. Oh, Mr. Jason Thibodeau. How could I forget? Hope you're doing great. So before we get to tonight's topic, I want to throw up a trivia question that you can noodle over, and I'll show you the answer at the end of the episode. Tonight's trivia question. We're going back to A, B, C, D, and E tickets. So the question is, which of these was a People Mover when it first debuted? Of course, you'll learn that it first debuted in Disneyland. What ticket do you think it was? Do you think it was an E ticket? Do you think it was an A ticket? Go ahead and punch in what you think in chat, and then we can all compare notes afterwards. So again, what kind of ticket was the People Mover? And in case you're not familiar, the E tickets represented the most exciting rides, and the A tickets were the most kind of calm rides. And we had a good mix. So again, I'd encourage you to share your memories of this great attraction. And I would like you to go ahead and punch into chat what you think what this attraction meant to you. All right. So, and again, please go to the website, grandmiraculous.com. Entry code tonight. What else could it be? For those of you who are familiar with the Magic Kingdom version of the People Mover, what else could it possibly be? It is ORAC. And for those of you who don't know the reference, well, you'll know the reference pretty soon. Okay, so let us go to our presentation. Oops, go back. All right. And I hope you're excited for this one. There are so many wonderful memories of this attraction that people have in their hearts. And I'm excited to go through these with you. Let me get rid of the banner. Mr. Dave's Disney Dreams is in the house. Hello, Dave. Hope you're doing great. So tonight we're going to be talking about the People Mover, and let's get into it. So in case you're not familiar, our methodology is very straightforward. We assert that there are 3 pillars for any successful attraction to be a successful attraction, and those are immersion, storytelling, and delight. We're representing these 3 axes through radar plots, so you can compare and contrast, just like I showed you earlier, the difference between Space Mountain and Superstar Limo, for example. Keep in mind, this is not a monologue, even though it looks like one. I'm talking for upwards of 45 minutes or an hour, but I need your voice. I would love you to go to the website, use the code tonight for People Mover, ORAC, and go ahead and submit your vote based on those 3 pillars. And yeah, we'll see what we see at the end of when people vote. I'm just going to cover this briefly. If you like what we're doing here, please donate to a worthy charity that tries to keep the memories of these attractions alive. One that I love is the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society, and I'd encourage you to support them. Okay, let's get into it. So the People Mover is one of my favorite attractions. I feel awful that it's no longer in Disneyland, but I have such great memories of it, riding it with my family. Thankfully, it's still around in Florida, and we'll talk about that. But as a West Coaster, this ride fills me with, it's such a mixed feeling because I have such happiness and such sadness associated with this ride. So thankfully, it's still alive over on the East Coast. So before we get into it, we have to cover our fundamental Imagineers. Of course, this is not exhaustive. There are many more people who have contributed their hard work into creating these attractions, but these are some of the common names that you see. We talked about this gentleman last week. John Hench is a legend, and I would put a capital L there. I'm not going to go through his biography, but he had a hand in the People Mover. The People Mover was interesting because it had multiple Imagineers who contributed to it. It wasn't purely driven by one person, but John definitely had a huge impact into it. Marty Sklar did, of course, too. Those of you know Marty Sklar very well. He's also a legend with a capital L. I want to highlight Roger Broggie. We talked about Roger Broggie last time. It was about 4 or 5 episodes ago. And he joined Disney early on in '39 as a precision machinist. And he installed the multiplane camera, which of course is the famous camera that helped all the animated features work the way they do. Roger had a hand in the People Mover, as you'll see. And who else? We can't talk about anything moving in Disney without referencing Mr. Bob Gurr. Bob Gurr had a very, very heavy hand, and the People Mover wouldn't be what the People Mover is if it weren't for Bob Gurr. So, facts and figures first and foremost. There were 2 instances of this attraction. One in Disneyland, like I mentioned. It opened in July 2nd, 1967. But sadly, my heart, it closed August 21st, 1995. Magic Kingdom opened on July 1st, 1975. That's when the new Tomorrowland was open to everybody. And of course, today, only the Magic Kingdom version of the People Mover remains. So in terms of history, where did this idea come from? It seems a little odd just to have a series of cars just move around one particular land in your theme park. So where did this idea all come from? Well, we have to go all the way back to the World's Fair. The 1964-65 New York's World's Fair was incredibly important to Disney history and also theme park history in general. Many, many famous attractions got their start in the New York World's Fair, and we count the People Mover as one of them. Well, you might say, I don't remember a People Mover at the New York World's Fair, and you'd be right. However, the attraction that we're talking about is a slightly different one. It turns out that the Ford Motor Corporation sponsored a gigantic attraction called the Magic Skyway, and this was unveiled in 1964, and Henry Ford II, the son of Henry Ford, reached out to Disney, and they said they would be interested in creating a pavilion and an attraction to actually support the Ford Motor Company. So the show was called the Magic Skyway, and it actually featured real Ford convertibles as ride vehicles. So these ride vehicles weren't just the standard car that you're familiar with. They were actually Ford convertibles with their innards ripped out, and you'll see why in a second. This had a huge budget. 30 million at the time was a ginormous budget, and 275,000 square feet. In fact, this was the largest structure at the World's Fair. The show itself featured a show going back in time to visit dinosaurs and cavemen. And you might think, this sounds a little familiar, right? Those of you who have been to Disneyland know very well the dinosaurs at the end of the railroad between Tomorrowland and Main Street. Well, we'll get to that in a second, but it turns out that the attraction was very much akin to that. Well, it became one of the most popular attractions at the World's Fair. The Ford Pavilion definitely struck gold there, and lots of people have memories of visiting it. Of course, this was before my time, but here's a few pictures of what it looked like. Let me shrink myself so that you can see these better. The picture on the left was the exterior of the pavilion, and you can see kind of the transparent tunnel there. And the transparent tunnel actually had cars looping around the pavilion. And if any of you remember World of Motion at Epcot, it was kind of a similar thing. The vehicles start off and then they make their big circle around the front entrance and then they go into the show. And you can see, of course, a bird's eye view from the right picture of what it actually looked like to be on that ride. And just sure enough, they were Ford convertibles. So who'd have thunk? Go back here. I want to put in some quotes here, and let me get rid of myself so that you could read the quote. Several quotes provided by Imagineers tell the story much better than I can. Quote, We discovered the idea for the New York's World Fair Wedway PeopleMover system while on a business trip to the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, John Hench said. Walt and I were invited to visit the mill where Ford made steel for car bodies. We saw a device for handling steel ingots, masses of glowing red-hot metal. The ingots were moved around on tracks, powered by rollers from one area to another, while being transformed into sheet steel for making cars. Well, Walt asked, do you think we could put some kind of a seat on that type of conveyor or some kind of arrangement for people to ride on? Do you think this thing would handle it? Hench replied, sure, look at the weight carried here. Ah, I bet Roger Brogy would know how to do it. So there it begins, and this is how, crazy ideas start, and eventually the engineers have to go figure out how to make it work. So heroes on both sides. So the question then became, we have a little physics challenge here. It turns out that there are some elevation changes in the pavilion itself. And moving cars around a flat surface is one thing. Anybody who's been to an old school car wash can understand how cars can be moved through a building like that. However, moving cars with elevation changes is quite another challenge and very, very difficult. Well, the key was something called the booster brake drive system, and it was created by Aero Development. Aero, of course, is the company behind many theme park attractions technologies. And actually, this system was innovated on the Matterhorn. It consists of small drive wheels at the crest of each hill. So, for example, if you go up the Matterhorn, if you look at the track, you'll see some drive wheels at the very top. And what these drive wheels do is that they can actually move faster or move slower to allow the car to either accelerate or decelerate. Of course, to help the situation, the car's heavier parts like the engine, the transmission, and things like that were all removed. Here's another great quote, and I'll get rid of myself here. Walt remembered the booster brakes on the Matterhorn, which were at the top of each hill. They were rolling tires that helped slow down the cars and get them moving at the right speed. And that was said by Roger Brogy. So this is another example of standing on the shoulders of giants in a way. We take a technology that was innovated in one attraction and we parlay it for another attraction. We put it into that one and make it even better. And this is a pattern that you see over and over again in the theme park business. Here's a picture of what it looked like. This is a kind of two guests actually taking off at the very beginning of the attraction. And you could see at the very top, welcome aboard Ford's Magic Skyway, a Walt Disney adventure through time and space, which is just great. So the solution was to put electric motors powering urethane wheels along a track every few feet. And let me go back to the previous picture a little bit. You can actually see, oh good, my cursor is visible. You can actually see some wheels in the floor there if you look closely, immediately right before the car and immediately right after the car. Well, these wheels are placed very strategically along the track. And basically what these wheels do is that they move the car. The nice thing about it is that the car itself didn't need any power whatsoever. All of the propulsion was done by the wheels in the track. So these electric motors were actually the workhorse. They were actually moving all the cars along the track. The cars themselves had masonite on the bottom, which happens to be a very silent and grippy kind of material. And the wheels push the cars forward along the track and more importantly, can control their speed. So you can have sections that go slow and sections that go fast. The idea actually behind this system was fundamental to one of the ideas of Epcot. And one of Walt's ideas was to have this kind of system powering the mass transit inside Epcot, which of course originally was a scheme for a whole city. So when this was pitched at the time, they boasted that there would never be a broken down car because, hey, if one of the wheels or one of the motors fails, well, you would always have the next motor to kind of pick up the slack and it would continue carrying on the car. So it turns out that Bob Gurr set up a prototype. It was a 300-foot oval track on the Disney backlot, and it actually worked. Here's a picture of what it looked like. So you can see again the wheels and the track, and you can see, I don't know if that's Bob in the picture or not, but this is an example of a very early prototype. Let me pop over to chat and say hi to some folks who showed up. Dave's Disney Dreams. Hello, Dave. Hope you're doing great. Let's see. Bitritz is here. Hello, madam. Hope you're doing well. It's me, David T is in the house. Hello, David. Regina Erie is in the house. Hello, Regina. Thanks for being here. Gloria Thibodeau. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. If you haven't already, please hit like, subscribe, and share this out if you like what you're hearing. Here's a wonderful picture. Enough that I should get rid of my face here. This is Walt in the Magic Skyway, of course. You know Walt. And in the upper left, behind the driver's seat, is actually Henry Ford II. And I'm not sure who the third person is in the picture. So if any of you know who that person is, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But they look quite pleased and quite happy, but for a publicity picture anyway. Now, of course, these dinosaurs that lived in the attraction, they live on today in Primeval World, in Disneyland proper. So those of you who have been on the railroad on Disneyland between Tomorrowland and Main Street can actually look at these actual dinosaurs that were on the Magic Skyway. And yeah, you'll see scenes very much akin to what people in the World's Fair saw. Of course, there won't be any cavemen. I guess we saved some of those for Spaceship Earth, but you can at least see the dinosaurs. So this was a very successful pavilion at the World's Fair, and the idea needed to be expanded, as Walt does. So in 1964, Walt realized something. He could use this technology for a new system that he called the Wedway PeopleMover. Walt really wanted to get people an overview of Tomorrowland before they chose what to ride. This was key in his head. So the idea was that you could get a little taste of each major attraction in a land, and then you can go decide, do I want to ride Space Mountain or do I want to do something else, and so forth. And Walt was really keen on that idea. In fact, the word People Mover itself was Walt's code name for the project. But sometimes, you know, when you name things a certain code name, it tends to stick. So this was, it turns out to be the actual name for the attraction. Well, of course, Walt wanted to use this as a prototype for even bigger ideas. I had mentioned that the ideas for Epcot, which were ideas for a full-blown city, the idea was to use people movers across the city and to not have any cars in the city itself. Well, in 1966, Walt got a chance to ride the prototype, the one that I showed you earlier. However, he passed away before it could debut in Disneyland. So unfortunately, he never saw the final product of his vision. Now, the first version in Disneyland was actually sponsored by Goodyear, the tire company. And of course, they make more things than tires. But you can imagine why Goodyear had some interest in sponsoring this attraction. Well, I had millions of tires. You know, the urethane wheels turned out to actually be Goodyear wheels in the track. So this was a wonderful marketing opportunity for them. Of course, Ford declined. There are lots of stories about, you know, what happened there in the aftermath of the World's Fair. But you can probably imagine that they were somewhat reluctant to sponsor an attraction where the idea is we would replace the automobile. So unfortunately, Ford pulled out, but Goodyear stepped in. Now, what's really funny is that some of you may have memories of the People Mover in Disneyland. There was a big logo that was rotating right on the track, right after you take off on the ride. Well, that logo was fashioned after Goodyear itself. And I'll show you a picture later, but you can kind of see, hey, yeah, that looks pretty close. Now you may ask, Goodyear, isn't there a sponsorship conflict? If I'm in charge of Goodyear, don't I want to get people into cars so that they can buy my tires? Why would a company like Goodyear sponsor the People Mover of all things? Well, this quote from the chairman and CEO, Russell DeYoung, kind of explains it. He says, yes, it presumes some curtailment of the use of automobiles, and autos use tires. But you may ask, isn't your business really tires? The answer is simply that Goodyear is basically in the transportation business. Tires represent, he further explained, 55% of the company's total business. So there was a huge chunk of Goodyear dedicated to transportation in general. So sponsoring the People Mover was a natural step for them. Here's a picture of what it looked like in Disneyland in 1967. Those of us who are West Coasters look at this picture and we can sigh. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit more nostalgia here. If you happen to hang out near the entrance, you might have heard this quite a bit.
You are now beginning a grand circle tour of Tomorrowland aboard the People Mover, the first system of its kind in the world. Since its 1967 opening, the People Mover has carried more than 50 million guests.
That was the original intro as you got in the car and you started your way along the way. It got more interesting. It turns out that the People Mover music is very evocative, and you can actually see what that, or listen to what that music was. We put one of the original videos that someone provided on our playlist. Nightbot is adding this playlist link occasionally in chat if you want to check it out. It had music like this. Anyway, you get the idea. This was very evocative music of the 60s and 70s, and it fit. It worked really well. So here's a picture of the two signs, and you might remember the picture on the left, the big People Mover sign that was rotating. Well, it's almost a carbon copy of the Goodyear logo, and that was very intentional. I hadn't actually made the connection in my head before I saw it myself. All right. In fact, Goodyear even made the speed ramp. This was the actual entrance to the attraction. If you look down, you saw the Goodyear logo front and center. And the speed ramp itself was really interesting too. It also showed off, Goodyear's rubber and tire making skills and so forth, but in a moving platform kind of way. So what this accomplished is that A, it avoided stairs, B, allowed Goodyear to show off their technology, and C, we didn't need an escalator for it. So it actually brought people up to the actual center part of the attraction. Here's a picture of the People Mover later in life. You may notice that they got a new paint job that was to match some other attractions at the time. But what I want to point out in this picture is not the cars. I want you to take a look at the track. Take a look at the track and notice how beautifully curvy it is, and the structure below it is not just columns. It would have been somewhat trivial to just create, very, very blunt, kind of brutal columns, sharp turns, things like that. Well, it turns out that the track itself had some art behind it as well. Here's a wonderful quote by John Hench. In designing Tomorrowland, Imagineers considered the track layouts and structures to be as much design elements as the vehicles, and intended them to convey the same meaning. On the People Mover, the structural forms are designed to support physical forms in motion. The cantilevered and curved track and the winding curves in the structural elements create continuous eye movement for guests, because the eye interprets line as the record of action. The shapes are organic, with softened, intense edges that look like muscles, expressing movement. The streamlined look was efficient, but also beautiful. Normally, it would have been easier to design boxed right-angle columns. We opted for equally strong, curvilinear structures, supporting delicate, futuristic-looking roadbeds. What a great quote. Again, I would highly recommend you to pick up Designing Disney, which was John Hench's book. It's full of stuff like this. And we can go back and look at pictures. We can appreciate, some of the more subtler aspects of these attractions with that in mind. Okay, now here's a question. How should we handle speed changes on the attraction? You might think, well, if you have a long car on the track and there are wheels underneath it, what happens? How do we actually get the car to move at different speeds? Aren't we stuck at the same speed for all the wheels at a time? Well, Bob Gurr thought of that too, of course. And here's a great quote from him. He says, as a car would enter a speed change zone, each drive wheel ran at an increasing or decreasing rate of motion. That meant that if all the wheels were contacting the platen at the same time, some motors would be forced slower and some faster. We used ordinary squirrel cage type electrical motors, which can withstand this under overspeed condition with little strain. So they thought about that. And as a result, they're able to actually have parts of the track itself dictate how fast or how slow the car is moving. Again, I don't want to turn this into a physics class, but there are some aspects to the design of this attraction that really, really makes me smile. Well, moving on to the Magic Kingdom, we couldn't have the Magic Kingdom without its own People Mover. And it was named the Wedway People Mover, unlike the Disneyland version, which was simply called People Mover or Goodyear People Mover. And for reasons why you'll see, they really wanted to spotlight Imagineering. They were very proud of this particular attraction, and I'll explain why in a second. It opened in 1975. The track is 5,484 feet long, and the ride time is about 10 minutes, which is pretty long as attractions go. A covering was added. So unlike Disneyland, which has a bare open track, here a covering was added to protect against Florida rainstorms, which of course are prevalent. And unlike Disneyland, there are no elevation changes from start to finish. It's a completely flat track. However, there's one huge difference. I'm sure people in chat can understand what that difference is, and we need to talk about it. It uses something called linear induction motors. And what these are essentially parts in the track that create magnetic fields that propel the car along. So what this was able to accomplish is that it allowed us to get rid of the tires in the track and provide a much smoother ride, in theory anyway. So you can probably imagine that Goodyear wasn't exactly keen to sponsor a new attraction that featured 0 tires. So as a result, there was no sponsor for Goodyear for the Magic Kingdom version. Now let's talk about linear induction motors a little bit. The best way to put this is to imagine a magic conveyor belt, and it pulls a train along the conveyor belt. But the key is it doesn't touch the wheels at all. Well, it turns out that the track is filled with plates that create rolling magnetic fields. It's actually a tripole electric field. And what it does is that it actually creates a magnetic field that moves forward. The field itself is the thing that's moving. Well, the bottom of the car has a gigantic metal plate. And it turns out that when you put metal or any conductor inside a magnetic field, it induces tiny little swirling currents in the plate, which generate their own magnetic field. So these two magnetic fields start pressing against each other. And that's one reason that the cars are actually able to levitate. So yes, although there's too much weight to completely levitate, these parts in the track actually help push the car up a bit. And that also helps with propulsion. This kind of gets a little bit far afield, but I found this video and I fell in love with it. It's a video from 1971 from Professor Eric Lastwaite in the UK. And it actually talks about linear induction motors in a very, very great way. It's very friendly. It's not too much math. So yeah, it's a great technology. Let me go back a second. It's a great technology. There are a few downsides to it. It's not quite as efficient as simply moving a car down the track, but it provides a lot of benefits. For example, the maintenance is fantastic. You don't have to worry about replacing tires. You can imagine blown tires in the Disneyland version. The cars themselves have nothing in it other than a metal plate. So from a maintainability point of view, it's a fantastic thing. Now, some of you may laugh because one of the things about the Magic Kingdom People Mover is that it goes down a lot. Well, that's more of a factor of its age than anything. But from a mechanism point of view, it's a great invention. Let's talk about the narration a little bit. There have been lots of narration changes over the years. The original narration was by Jack Wagner. Hey, Hope. I see Hope in the chat. And yes, she's calling out Jack Wagner. So +5 points for the Disney history. Well, and you heard from Jack Wagner last time. June 1985 it was replaced by ORAC-1, the computer. So ORAC was kind of a imaginary invention. It was supposed to be a computer that told you about the People Mover and what it's all about. 1994 came along and it brought a massive refurbishment. The Wedway People Mover became the Tomorrowland Transit Authority. And there was new narration that lasted until 2009. What's fun about the narration is that it actually mentioned 3 different lines. So you had a red line, a blue line, and a green line. And the story was, hey, you would have one of these lines go out to outer space, a red line would go somewhere else on the Earth, and you happen to be on the blue line at the time. 2009 came along featuring new narration with some brief character clips. So there are characters who talked along the narration. For example, Buzz Lightyear, when you passed the Buzz Lightyear attraction. And 2022 had a brand new narration. Some of you may remember right after the pandemic, there was a new narration added to the ride featuring ORAC-5. This narration had lots of Easter eggs in it. So those of you who ride the ride can probably hear references to, if you had wings, there are some references to Timekeeper, where they mentioned Nine Eye, for example, and lots of fun hidden stories for us Disney fans. Well, Disneyland itself had some additions as well. 1977 saw what was called the Super Speed Tunnel. And the Super Speed Tunnel was essentially a gigantic chamber, maybe gigantic's too strong a word, but behind the upper level of Carousel of Progress, or the America Sings building, was a very large, two very large chambers. And what they did is that they projected images on the walls to simulate the fact, or simulate the idea that you're moving at a much higher speed than you actually were. So they projected race cars and things like that moving along the side to make you imagine that you're actually moving fast. And it worked. You know, if you sat back and actually kind of took in your peripheral vision, you can kind of see it work. 1982 came along and they changed this to Tron. And they renamed the attraction People Mover through the world of Tron. And some of you may remember this noise too.
Warning, you have invaded the electronic realm of the master computer program. Prepare for the game grid of Tron.
I don't know if that brings back memories to anybody, but I remember whenever I was outside the entrance to Autopia, or, you know, right when the Skyway entrance was, you would hear that over and over and over and over again. So that's a fun memory as well. So we got to talk about this. Someone had a very interesting, let's say interesting, a very interesting idea. And the idea was, well, the People Mover is great, but can we really punch it up a notch and turn it into a roller coaster? What an idea. You have this very long track. It goes around Tomorrowland. Can we inject some excitement into it and actually replace the cars and turn it into a high-speed attraction? Well, 1998 came along, and together with a big renovation to Tomorrowland, brought the infamous rocket rods, which lasted only a couple of years in Disneyland. Well, it turns out that this was a better idea than it was actually an executed concept. There were multiple reasons for this. And before I get into that, let me explain the ride a little bit. You got into these vehicles that you saw right on the screen, and I'll add myself so I can talk. Essentially, it followed the same People Mover track around Tomorrowland, but it did so at presumably a very high speed, so that you would zip around the track in Tomorrowland and presumably have an exciting experience. In fact, the attraction name actually had some words below the entrance. I think it said the road to tomorrow or something like that. So they were pitching this as something really exciting and would represent transit in the future. Well, there were several fatal flaws with rocket rods. One of them is that the ride vehicles were very low capacity. The vehicles themselves only held 5 people, and the launch only launched one like every half minute. So you can imagine this is about 10 people were launched in the attraction every minute. Doing the math, that's 600 people per hour. That's a dismal capacity. And it turns out that people on the line definitely felt it. I remember getting in line for rocket rods, and they actually made the line inside the former Circle Vision 360 building. And we were going in circles and circles and circles and circles in that line at a very slow speed. That was 2 or 3 hours of my life. I want to get back. The other problem is that these quote unquote rocket rods, they didn't go very fast. Well, it turns out that they added the track. As you can see, they actually had the pole in the middle of the track. They had to add a whole bunch of stuff to support the idea of a fast moving ride. Well, they placed the track over the existing track, but they didn't add any bank turns. Those of you who watched our Matterhorn episode may recall, hey, you have a very enclosed space. So what do? You actually bank the track so that it can make these tight turns in that enclosed environment. Well, they didn't do that for rocket rods. So the problem is every time the rocket rod encountered a curve, it actually had to slow down quite a bit so that it could make the curve. So you would have this phenomenon of making a curve, speeding up, beep, beep, and then slowing down almost immediately to make the next curve. And you repeat this process, and it actually made people sick because of the constant acceleration and deceleration. Well, we might talk about rocket rods some more in the future, but it was closed unceremoniously in 2000. The sad part is that the track remains to this day. So you can actually look when you're up waiting for the monorail, you can see the original rocket rods track. It's sitting there decaying. And we all hope that Disney will do something with that beloved track someday, but we'll see. Enough said about rocket rods. Now, the People Mover itself had a big legacy of its own. Because of the technology behind it, it inspired lots of other projects. One of them turns out to be an international airport, the Houston International Airport in particular. They have both a skyway and a subway. Well, this one, they actually brought Disney people to the airport to implement something akin to the People Mover in Florida, to implement some kind of a shuttle system between the different terminals. And it turns out that this is the only Wedway People Mover built outside of a Disney property in Houston. Now, the trains themselves are completely unpowered. These actually are, what happens is that there's a mechanism in the door that allows the doors to open and close when it reaches a gate. And the audio came from the ceiling through holes in the top of the roof of the car. So you have this great system where the cars themselves completely powerless. So maintenance is a very easy thing. So it's worth asking this question. A lot of people love the People Mover. They keep it in their hearts. They ride it over and over and over again. Why is it that this simple transportation device, if you look at it, that's essentially what it is. It takes you for a loop around Tomorrowland. Why is this attraction so beloved? I'd encourage you to add your own comment in chat. But these are some ideas that I came up with. For one, it provides a rare moment of calm in the park. You know, there are lots of busy attractions, and it's really nice to just sit back, kick your feet up, and enjoy a very calm ride for 10 minutes. It showcases Walt's vision of what he envisioned both for the theme park and for Epcot. It offers unique perspectives of different attractions. A lot of kids, they like to lean over and look to see what the inside of Buzz Lightyear is, or if Tomorrowland or if Space Mountain might be too scary for them. It adds to the kinetic nature of the theme park. Tomorrowland really needs to be kinetic and moving and have multiple things. I miss the days when Tomorrowland had multiple things in motion, and it added a very key element to that. And it had some fun narration. They added more jokes over time. It was originally a little serious. Will it ever return? We don't know. I hear rumors every so often. Sometimes you'll hear a rumor that it's coming back, but we haven't heard anything official yet. So let's talk about the ride analysis a bit. Does this work as a good attraction? And I'll go through the 3 pillars of immersion, storytelling, and delight. Immersion, I give it an 8. The theming is great. It immerses guests in a retro kind of future version of Tomorrowland. The motion's great, it glides smoothly. There are a few bumps in the road, but it's mostly smooth. The linear induction motors in Florida help. Of course, you have these times when you go chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, but for the most part, it's a pretty smooth ride. The transitions from outdoor to indoor scenes are smooth. Narration, you get some wind at your face. The lighting shifts between the inside and outside to delight guests. Every detail supports the illusion of a functioning mass transit system. Visual design, audio narration, and the ride pacing all adhere to a really good retro future theme. From a surprise point of view, you get sudden views into attractions. I don't know that people who rode PeopleMover for the first time knew that they would see inside the center of Space Mountain. Now, it kind of suffers in the visual effects department. It lacks modern projections or high-tech animatronics. They try to remedy that a little bit with the super speed tunnel, but it kind of lacks in that factor. It's woven beautifully into Tomorrowland's layout, and the queue itself is pretty subtle, but it's sleek. Storytelling, a little bit less. I give it a 6. There's not a huge story behind the PeopleMover. The PeopleMover, at the heart of it, is a guided tour, rather than a traditional story with a beginning, a climax, and a resolution. There's none of that. It's more of a guided tour of Tomorrowland. And on that basis, it works, but it's not really strong in the storytelling department. In terms of role assignment, well, you're essentially assuming the part of a mass transit passenger in a futuristic-looking attraction. Visual storytelling is good. There are transitions between external panoramas and diorama rooms, kind of like visual chapters. And it celebrates human ingenuity and optimism about the future. There's minimal narration setup. You don't hear anything, in fact, until you're actually comfortably on board and on your way. The thematic fit is great. The story elements align closely with Tomorrowland's styling. From a delight point of view, I think you gotta give it a pretty high score. Lots of smiles when you see people coming off this ride. It's a very relaxed ride, and it feels refreshing in the middle of the park's crazy energy. Of course, for people like me, the PeopleMover has a huge nostalgia factor. I already see lots of comments in chat about the nostalgia about PeopleMover, and it really taps into those memories. The steady glide offers just enough motion to keep senses engaged without inducing thrills. You get to see backstage glimpses behind attractions, which is great. It's truly a historical attraction, both from a mechanical point of view and from a thematic point of view. And it's very replayable. I mean, you go look at some of the videos online, people ride it over and over and over again. The accessibility is not really an issue because of the super speed ramp and things like that. There's not really an issue getting on the ride. And it's a pretty long ride. It's 10 minutes long. It's a good balance. So all in all, I give it a pretty high score, 7.27. I'd encourage you to think about these 2 pillars or 3 pillars and go to Grand Miraculous with no and, grandmiraculous.com, and provide your own vote. So here's a trivia answer. In fact, PeopleMover was a D ticket when it first opened. You can see here, this is a picture, I believe, from 1969. And you can see here at Tomorrowland, the PeopleMover. And it fit in with other D ticket attractions like Flight to the Moon, the Skyway, the Canal Boats, Mark Twain, and some other rides that we miss a lot. So it wasn't quite an E-ticket attraction, but it was good enough to demand a D ticket. All right, so like I mentioned before I hit the outro, there's a very important interview going on right now by our friends, the Hitchhiking Bones. So I really want to send you off, but before I do, let's talk about next week a little bit. We're coming up on our 10th episode. We're going to have our 9th episode next week. And I figure that I wouldn't be doing this channel a service if we didn't talk about this fundamental attraction that laid the grounds for so many other attractions. And we've got to talk about it in the first 10 episodes. Of course, it's the Enchanted Tiki Room. So we'll be covering Walt's favorite attraction with the birds next week and talk about where it got its start and how it influenced so many other attractions. That'll be next week. So in lieu of Ray Bradbury's quote that I usually read, I am going to drop a link into chat, and this link will allow you to go to the Hitchhiking Bones channel. So I'd encourage you right now to click that link, go to their chat channel, and let's raid them. You know, we've never done a raid on this channel. So go over there and tell them, hey, Grand and Miraculous sent me. And it'll be exciting to see what Tom Nab has to say. So with that, I want to thank you for being here. If you haven't voted, go to grandmiraculous.com. Go ahead and punch in your vote, and we'll see what the results are next week. And we'll talk about the Tiki Birds next week. And I hope you all have a very pleasant evening, and I'm so grateful for you to be here. Please hit like, hit subscribe, and share out the stream on your way out. Thanks a lot, everybody.